Love lives here.
And so I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker today. She is Reverend Sarah Adams, a licensed minister with Centers for Spiritual Living. She was raised in Science of Mind, and some of her favorite members were attending Youth of Religious Science teen camps and being one of the founding members of Agape's Vision Essence youth group. As an adult, Sarah spent her early professional life building bridges and roads, literally, as an Army engineer, and has been an educator and a school leader for close to 20 years. She has a master's in teaching as well as a master's in consciousness studies. She has a passion for people and building community, believing every being has a unique gift and a life path that supports greater and greater revelations of truth. Her mission is to live life fully awakened to the consciousness behind all forms, with an ear to the still small voice, a heart for our shared humanity, and an eye for the universal arc of transformation unfolding as each of us. So please join me in giving a rousing Riverside welcome to Reverend Sarah.
I love that rousing Riverside welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. How great. Wow, thank you. It's so good to be here again. And what a privilege to be in spiritual community with people who are dedicated to living love out loud and in themselves and recognizing and experiencing that in themselves and in each other for healing and transformation of your own life and the life of the community around you and the greater world. There couldn't be anywhere better and any worthier cause to spend time than together this morning. So thank you. What a privilege. So good. Today, this month, the theme is living wonder in nature. And really, today we get to talk about what does that look like on planet Earth and being in the wonder of that. And when I think about nature and planet Earth in general, what do you think of? What comes to mind if you're thinking about planet Earth? Do you have a feeling of joy, or maybe you have a feeling of hopelessness, or maybe it's both? Yeah, I can think for myself. Driving over here, I was remembering when, growing up, I went to these teen camps, and they mostly were, the summer ones were up in Idlewild, so just up the mountain from here. And I remember just the joy of like getting up the mountain, and we would get to the tree line and the smell of the pine trees and just seeing all the green and the majestic peaks and the creeks and the water, and just living in the wonder of that was so inspiring and like soul nourishing, and seeing the stars at night and feeling my tiny minuscule place in the universe. And then we would go back at the end of the week, we'd go back home and drive down the mountain. And this is in the 80s and the early 90s. And so there was definitely smog present. I would see like this layer of just kind of haze and kind of descend back into the freeways and concrete jungle and whatnot. And so I kind of think about that. Like I can think that there are times when I can really feel present to the wonder of nature and the beauty of it, and feel that oneness. And then there are times where I'm confronted with the reality of the impact that our human endeavors make, whether it's in air pollution or whether it's in the reduction of green space or pollution in our oceans and rivers. So what can we think about in terms of what can we bring to this experience from a science of mind perspective? Because the truth is we're human and divine. We are spiritual beings having a spiritual being experience in a human body, in a human context. We're walking this earth, right, where we are. So what can we do? Because we know that in science of mind, there is only one. There is this oneness that is back of everything. There's this infinite living consciousness that is pouring itself and expressing itself into and as and through everything. So how can I bring that spiritual truth into those experiences where I'm coming back down the mountain and I'm in the human smog and pollution and traffic of it all? So when I know that I can be tapped into that oneness, that infinite consciousness, then I know that what I believe and what I speak, and when I can speak the truth and really come from that, then I know that I can't help but manifest and experience a greater experience of truth and oneness. So practically, like, how can we do that? How can we have like one foot in each, like in the spiritual experience, and bring that right into the root, into the center of the moment that we're in? And I think the first part of that is to be fully present in the awe and the wonder of it. If we can be absolutely aware of with the awe and the wonder when we have those encounters in nature, or when we just marvel at something we see. Um, Ernest Holmes repeatedly says that we can only experience that which we embody. So let's embody that experience of of the world that we want to live in, the world of wholeness and justice and beauty and equity and a clean and healthy environment. So, Ernest Holmes also refers to, he has this phrase that's been living with me lately, that the beauty of form around me is the garment of God. So I know that what I seek, when I find what I'm looking for. So if I'm going to seek and want to experience the garment of God, I'm going to look for it wherever I am. I was recently, I'm a podcast junkie, so I listen to all sorts of things. And I was listening to this interview with this fellow who is a researcher on awe and wonder, which is fortunate for us to talk about awe and wonder today. His name's Dacher Keltner, and he's a researcher at UC Berkeley, and he specifically researches awe and wonder. And so he says awe is a brief emotion, and it is the feeling you have when you encounter vast things that you cannot understand. So I think about, he's then gone on to do these research and study that when you have experiences of awe and when you're really present to that moment of wonder, it does things for your mind and for your consciousness. And so like some of the things is that it actually physically stretches your mind. If we have to, we have to stretch our mind to embody and imagine a greater world than what we have right now. So let's do some exercises to stretch that. Let's live in the moment of wonder and awe. So he says, that he did one study where he had a group of people in a museum, and some of them were looking at this enormous life-size replica of a T-Rex dinosaur, just the enormity of it. And people stood there for a couple minutes, and then you had another group that was just wandering around. And he had them both fill out a sentence at the end, "I am blank." And so the people who stood in awe and kind of wondered at this enormous marvel of this T-Rex, their answers, when they said "I am," all of their answers had to do with, they identified themselves with more of the collective, with their belonging to something greater. And the people who didn't have that kind of awe experience, their answers were much more insular, much more just focused on a narrow identity. So really having an experience of awe stretches our experience of oneness and belonging to something more than ourselves. The other thing that living in an awe and a wonder moment does is that it increases our capacity for compassion and the tendency to collaborate. So he said people who experience awe have more, are more likely to cooperate and share resources and sacrifice for others. So he said, being in the presence of vast things calls forth a more modest, less narcissistic self, which enables greater kindness towards others. So another experiment he did was on the campus of Berkeley. There's, I guess, the tallest eucalyptus trees in North America. So he had some people stand in this grove and look up and behold them, and another group that was just staring at, I think, across the campus. And then they had this experiment unbeknownst to the people where someone was walking by and dropped something. They dropped a pen. And the people who had just spent some moments looking up at the trees and the wonder, they were more likely to stop and help the person pick up the pen for them and give them. And he replicated this over and over. So can we add a moment of awe? And he says just 15 minutes a week really has these benefits of increasing our mind and our capacity for oneness, for understanding and belonging, for kindness and compassion. So can we add that? Can we when we find a moment of awe, can we really savor it? Whether it's something you see in your garden, maybe just the wonder of a rose unfolding in all of its beautiful, or the scent, or maybe it's a tree. I live by Balboa Park in San Diego, and there's these trees, these fig trees that are enormous. They remind me of the tree of life. They're hundreds of years old. And just to stand next to a tree that's that old, or I was camping in Yosemite earlier this summer and standing next to trees that were like thousands of years old, just to savor a moment, wherever it is. Or maybe it's something just reading a marvel that someone invented, or seeing those pictures from the telescope that went, beyond the Hubble, that you got to see pictures from millions of years ago. That's awe-inspiring. That blows my mind, literally, right? So we can stay in that moment. We can be present in those moments when we find them, just to really savor them and be present to that moment of awe and wonder. And at the same time, we also can be present and really authentically present to when things are hard and are difficult. And when we find out things that are happening in the environment, to our beloved planet, that are impacting it, we can also be present to that, even though it can be uncomfortable. I think it's really important, because we're not in the business of bypass, right? We've talked about this, I'm sure, that we're in the business of being present in this world and manifesting a world that works for everyone in the midst of what it is. And so we have to really see what it is to be able to break through that and have a greater experience. So we need to be present to that, be present to what we hear, what's hard for someone else, to be present to when something feels destructive, like when I was in Yosemite earlier this summer, camping and being amongst the trees and feeling the wonder of it. A week later, I hear about the wildfires, and there were fires that were encroaching and were going to burn these trees that were thousands of years old, and my heart just hurt. So it's important for us to be present to that, to really feel the loss of that, to feel the grief of that, to be able to hold how important that is, to let that speak to us. I was also listening to a podcast, an interview recently with a woman named Colette Pichon Battle, and she's a lawyer. She's the founder and director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, and she's created a network called the Red, Black, and Green New Deal, a climate initiative for the movement of Black lives. She's from the Creole, kind of South Bayou in Louisiana. And she had some wonderful and insightful things to say about what's happening. And she's taking action for the things. But she talked about some of these experiences that we really have to wake up to, we have to see and speak to. We want to have, we want to see what's happening. So everything from, like she was talking about, these oil companies that for their fear of losing profits, they will inhibit growth into solar panels. Like they'll lobby against the incentives for people to have solar energy just so they can have their profits. She talked about a way of being present. She organized this pilgrimage of people of color and indigenous people. They went to she lives at the very end of the Mississippi, and she took this group to the very headwaters of Mississippi, and they traveled down the river, and every time they'd stop, they'd seek out indigenous people and acknowledge the land where they pulled in, and they would seek permission to be there, and they would have these rituals, and they would listen to what their experience was of the environment around them, what the impact was, all the way down the river, and hearing how different things impacted them. So she could see like there was this cycle of destruction where there's drilling for fossil fuels in New Orleans and that in the Gulf Coast, and then those fossil fuels are used to create pesticides and chemicals that get used in Minnesota and Iowa and all the way along the river that poison the waters. And then they travel down, and then they create these dead zones back at the mouth of the Mississippi where fish can't grow. And it's a cycle that impacts all of these people along the river and impacts communities who can't fish, whose community was revolving around that as their food source or their income. And they just sat and cried together. And so I think it's important to really be present to what it is and how things impact others and how our actions impact others, so that we can be present not from a place of shame or blame, but just from a place of responsibility and ownership, because we are one. We care about our community. We care about the world. We can come from a place that knows that there's something better and we can move through that, that we are more than our mistakes, we are more than our harmful actions, but we have to take action to address that. She says this challenge requires us to recognize a power that greater than ourselves and a life longer than the ones we will live. It requires us to believe in the things that we're privileged enough not to see, not to have to see. So it really requires us to be present in the same moment of knowing that there's a greater power than we see in this moment, and that there's a life that's longer than the one we're living, and we're living into that. We're supporting that experience. So that leads us into what can we do when we're being present to the wonder and awe of something, and we're stepping into and we're being present to what's hard and uncertain, the impact of actions around us. How can we move forward then from that place? And so I think it's for us to, like I said before, we're breaking through. We're not bypassing or ignoring or denying. We're seeing what is and moving through that from a higher consciousness, a higher vibration. That's our gift in Science of Mind, as we get to continually practice and remember what spiritual truth can I know in this moment? What can I, and I have to be able to see it first to be able to take action. Michael Singer wrote The Untethered Soul, and he wrote a few other books about surrender. And he was talking about, if like an analogy that made sense to me, if you can't stand the sight of blood, then you can't really address a cut or an injury. You have to be able to see it first to be able to heal it or put something on it, right? So we have to be able to see it. But then he also talked about like what consciousness can we inhabit as if it was like a hot air balloon? And we have this higher consciousness that we know that we are from, that is all that we are, but we have these thoughts and these old beliefs that kind of tether us and hold us down. So what thoughts do we have when we're moving into these situations, when we're talking about our planet and climate change? Do we have a thought that nothing is ever going to change? Do we have a thought that money and lobbyists always win out? Or maybe it's more of a personal nature that this always happens, this is the way the world is. Those thoughts, if we can be aware of them and conscious of them, then we can let them go, and we can do things and do the spiritual work to release them so that we can inhabit a higher consciousness, so we can live into a greater truth that we know is true. I was at a family event recently with family friends that included Reverend Michael Beckwith, and he was talking about evolution and talking about, like, we have the traditional sense of evolution where things were, like Charles Darwin discovered, where when we have a limitation or a constriction, it forces us to adapt through the pain or the loss of that, whatever that constriction is. Kind of like that notion of the spiritual 2x4, something painful happens to you, and then you wake up and you realize you need to know a deeper truth because that was such a painful experience. But he talks about another level of evolution called active conscious evolution. And that's where we're taking in what we know, and we know, if we absolutely know that the universe is always for us, that life is for us, that life is good and always happening for our highest and best good, then we can look at everything we encounter as something to help aid our awakening. So we can consciously go into everything and say, let this serve my greater awakening. Let this experience, let whatever I'm having, whatever's happening in my environment, serve a greater revelation of the light and truth of my divine design. It could be that we wake up each morning and ask and seek for everything to serve our good. Let nothing be wasted. So we can have that conscious evolution as we move into all the issues that we encounter in our life today, and the greater experience of our world, whether it's climate change or injustice. It's the idea, I was talking with somebody and listening about this, like, where can we find hope in this moment? Like, it can feel hopeless. It can feel overwhelming and daunting with all the things that are happening. And this person like reframed it, that yes, all these things are happening and these things have happened over history, but like, we were born in this time and this place with our consciousness to be able to do something about it. So she had this notion that we're all spiritual elders, that we, by doing our spiritual work, we're not going to repeat the same cycle over and over. We are going to be active, conscious evolutionaries, that we are going to use this moment and all of these moments that can be painful or that can be harmful or wrong, we can use that to grow in our own evolution and our own spiritual consciousness. And then that helps us heal the race consciousness. That helps us heal and bring in a new experience of earth because we are willing to do the work. We're awake enough to know that we can transform and heal this time. And so we're bringing that awareness, that possibility, that potentiality to the moment. So that's what's called for. We can be steadfast in that. So circling back, what's called for is that we can do the work when we come up to those things that can be hard, not only for ourselves or in the environment around us. Whenever we have an experience of fear or powerlessness or rage at what's happening, we can take the moment to really reflect and do the work. Like, where is that in me? How is that living in me? How am I experiencing that in the world, in my life? And can I heal that? Can I do whatever, meditation or journaling or working with a practitioner or taking a class, whatever that spiritual work is that helps me become more aware and more free of these old patterns that I've been living into. Because the more free I can be, the more free I can hold the possibility for the world around me to be. So I can also acknowledge like the imagination. I can imagine a world that works for everyone. I can start trying to embody and live into that. I can seek that garment of God wherever I am. And the more I see that, the more I experience that and have that be the experience for others. And I can be in the experience of love. I can let myself be present to what I love, whether it's family or my community or how we interact in our neighborhood and the land that I live in, the physical geography that I'm at. That we are for something, that action starts from what we love. Fear drives anger and constriction. Love drives joy and possibility. So I want to stay in that place. I want to live and move from that place. And then it's about being present to what other people love, because we know that there are differences, and even in our politics, there's a lot of division. There's a lot of people who have different ideas about the solutions to going forward. So if I can, instead of being caught up in the differences or in the judgment, because I can certainly, I don't know about you, but I can certainly have opinions about some people on the other side of the political spectrum, right? So I always find that if I can go back to finding and connecting with them at what they love, then we can find some common ground. So if I can be present, so I'm going to practice being present to what people love, that everyone loves something. And so if we can share what we love with each other, we can see each other's humanity and feel that love, feel each other's value. So that way we can move forward in understanding. And when I'm present to someone who has a different experience, or I'm present to someone who's been harmed or impacted by an action that I've taken or an unconscious bias that I've had or something, I can listen with love and trying understanding to get to what they love rather than listening from reactivity or defensiveness or denial. So it's really like coming back and staying in that loving place, like you mentioned in your vision for your center here. It's really important for us to stay there. I'll end with some hope. Part of this podcast I was listening to about the environment said, where can we find hope? And hope is not something that happens when we're in a place of positive circumstances and guaranteed outcomes that we want. Hope is when we're in the place that feels dark and uncertain, and we have the faith and knowing regardless of what we see. And so this person was sharing that there is hope to be found. There's a lot that's happening. She said it's kind of like, if like the metaphor of the rock that Sisyphus kept pushing up the hill, and then it would be loose and then kind of roll back down, and they kept pushing it up, and then it would fall loose and roll back down. She said, like, it's not like that. It's like there's all these thousands of little hands pushing, and we've gotten the boulder actually over the crest of the hill, and we're gaining momentum. We're actually on the other side. There's a lot happening. She was saying that, even like in Texas, we're as conservative as it can be, that Dallas-Fort Worth was the first airport to be completely 100% carbon neutral, or that Houston is on track to meet the Paris Climate Accords on time or earlier. That there are groups on both sides of the political spectrum, even young evangelicals who are for climate change, that it's not so binary that, one side's for it and one side's against it. There are people of all beliefs and all spectrums and demographics that are working for things that are making change. So there is things that we can know and seek and allow to grow because we're paying attention to that and we're living into that. So that's my challenge for us today, is to take time to experience awe and wonder wherever you are. Let yourself be saturated in that for whatever moments you can, to hold and be present to what's happening that may be hard or harmful, with a space of love and compassion for yourself and for the other person. And then to move forward and act whatever it is from oneness, from that divine intelligence that's coming from a devotion to our planet and our home that we all share and love. So I will close with a affirmative prayer. So I'll just ask you all to take a moment with me and join in this intentional moment of time. And just know that there is that infinite loving intelligence that wants to know itself through each of us and through all of us and through this entire planet and all the ways that we live and have our being. And so I know that that divine intelligence, that is a intelligence and a presence of loving wisdom. It's always a presence and never an absence. And so I know that it's absolutely present for each of us as we do our own individual work, as we move about the planet, bringing blessings, being a blessing and blessed by all that we receive from our planet Earth, from all that we receive from the environment, and all that we give with our loving, conscious awareness, all the growth that we bring as spiritual elders. I call that forth now. I know that this high vibration of consciousness continues to expand in each of us for the good of ourselves and the good of our community. So I am so grateful to know this truth. I can surrender it and know it's already done in the mind of God. And so I just let it be with great thanksgiving. And so it is.
Love lives